Oh, sorry, James. Okay. Right. Okay, we all ready? Just find the papers. There it is. Okay. Welcome to the pile of notes here as well. Welcome to the Standards Committee meeting. If anyone's got a device, please either turn it off or mute it. Otherwise, it interferes with the system. Please advise the meeting may be recorded and that staff may use body-worn cameras. Data collected during these recordings will be processed and retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. Recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use the SBC or KCC laptop to participate virtually. Forget that. Welcome everyone. Welcome the KALC rep who is not here yet. Welcome Robin Harris, Monitoring Officer, and Joe Millard, Democratic Services. There is no planned evacuation, so if the alarm does go, I suggest you follow me out the door because I shall be first down the steps. There is nobody here that I can see that will need any assistance. No, good. Right, any apologies for absence and confirmation of substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Pete Neal, Councillor Richard Palmer and Councillor Ashley Wise. Councillor Wise is being substituted this evening by Councillor Tony Winklis. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, then. Any declaration? Oh, minutes of the meeting held on September the 23rd, 2025, minutes 321 to 340. Is it your wish that I sign these as a correct record? Item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone got any? No, great. Item 5, annual update complaints received under the Member Code of Conduct. Robin, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just by way of a quick introduction, just clarify that all members have had the opportunity to read the report and appendix which is supplied with the report. This is the first time that reports come to this committee in this particular format, which is actually, I think, following the committee of effectively this date last year, whereby members sought a change of how complaints were reported to the committee. So this is the first time the annual report has come with that new format. So fundamentally, I'll be really grateful if I could hear from members in relation to if this is what members were expecting, what they wanted, and if there's any way that we could adapt or otherwise improve the report in order to meet the requirements for members' scrutiny of these matters. Thank you, Chair.
My initial question while you're all thinking about it was, is this it? Because talk us through the process. I've made a complaint. Sorry, Hannah, you're in my eye line. I've written in and complained about Councillor Perkin. Whether it's true, false or indifferent or got case to answer, blah, 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 does it automatically go on the list?
Yes, that's the intention.
Okay, so if we are aware of complaints that have been made that don't actually tally up the numbers, we need to investigate?
Yes, absolutely.
Good, okay. Anyone else? James?
So going by this, when we do the year, so the year is just 2025, is it not up until now? Because according to this, we've had no complaints in this year.
So this is the 1st of January 2025 to the 31st of January 2025.
Right. Perfect, thanks. So I think just generally the layout and everything, I think works really well. It's nice and clear. Shows exactly the information, what we need. Yeah, not really much more to say about that. Just one thing we've got on there highlighted, one that's to be advised. I don't know if there was anything on that to start with.
So in relation to the matter which is referenced to 012-25, so the matter had in fact been reported to the police, and therefore the arrangements require that where the matter has been reported to a regulator or, for example, in this case, a prosecuting authority, that the standards regime takes no further steps until that matter has been finally dealt with and there has been no update that that's been finally dealt with. The individual complainant was chased, but there's no further update.
Thank you. If I can come back. That's great. Thanks. And the other thing I was going to say is there's a lot on here which seems to be, I don't know, it's a little bit strange. It seems to be the same complaint, but on separate days. So I don't know whether that is different people on the same thing. But if something like this, I can see that there's insufficient evidence, which seems to be the case with most of these. But obviously something has happened for there to be a number of complaints to be coming in, even though there's no further action. Is when these sorts of things come up, because there is obviously something that's happened. Is there still things that are done to try and speak to the parties and say, look, why has this happened? Is there things that we can do to help make that better, even though no further action was taken?
Yeah, certainly. The part of the function of the monitoring officer is also to provide advice and guidance to members, and also to make complainants aware of what can and can't be done in relation to the system and the regime.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for putting this together. It is, as Councillor Hunt said, laid out very well. 8 of the 13 complaints say insufficient evidence. So I'd like more detail about the actual evidence gathering process and whether people are being made aware that what constitutes viable evidence. Like, is that covered in the code of conduct? I can't think off the top of my head. My general rule of thumb is, treat people how you want to be treated, and generally I find that complaints don't get put in about me, although, I'm guessing that none have. I think I possibly would have been spoken to, but if there's so many where there's insufficient evidence, I think that needs to be something that's looked at this level to find out if it's someone, because some complaints will be false. There are such things as vexatious complaints, and in which case there would be no evidence. However, there are also lots of complaints where the evidence perhaps isn't fitting what's actually happened, and that's something that needs to be looked at, because for more than half of the complaints to be insufficient evidence suggests that there is an issue, but the council isn't capturing the right data, or the right evidence to proceed with a formal investigation, etc. So I do think that we could do with having a bit of a deep dive into that.
Not particularly easy for me to comment this evening in relation to the specific matters, but it is often the case that a complaint is properly made in writing, such as that it gets registered on this spreadsheet and recorded, but that without being vexatious, there is simply nothing to it, and there are a relatively limited number of grounds by which things are considered and or do not pass assessment, and that is obviously one of them. So happy to potentially at a future meeting provide a little more detail in relation to those ones, just to clarify for your satisfaction that there's not an issue, or that there is an issue if you're concerned in relation to that. But I can't really add anything further this evening. So if you would like an update, possibly even potentially a verbal update as a starting point in relation to those particular ones in that group, because it might be actually there's a really simple explanation that I just don't know off the cuff, and they go, yes, that's the issue, and your concerns are laid to rest, or in the alternative you continue to have concerns and we look at what we might be able to do about it.
So I think I agree with you. I think this needs, if there's so many, then perhaps the explanations need to be words of one syllable. So we should come back to it. It's very difficult because Robin knows these particular ones. It's very difficult to, off the top of your head, create one when you know so many. I can make it up. I can, well, Tom said this to me and I was very offended. Where's your evidence? Well, you could see him on CCTV sort of going like this at me. He was offering you a cigarette.
I understand that, but we're looking at this. This is a publicly available document, and there's 5 allegations of coercive behaviour, dismissal of concerns, and in the next box it says insufficient evidence. Would that put someone off putting in a complaint if they don't trust the process? And from that, would someone trust the process? Is the question that I would ask.
Just to speak on your behalf as a member, would you want a matter taken forward where there wasn't proper evidence against you? Because it works both ways, doesn't it?
No, of course, I wouldn't want
both in relation to has to be protection for members as well as protection for the public and or other members who are making complaints. So it does go both ways. Obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate to take a matter forward where there wasn't sufficient evidence.
I wouldn't want a complaint taken forward against my worst enemy if there was insufficient evidence, because it undermines the whole process, of course. But it's just maybe the way it's laid out or the wording could be looked at to try and reduce that.
Yeah, I think it's probably just that there's limited grounds for turning it down, and therefore that's the reason that's given. Hence, and also this is a quite deliberately anonymised report in order that it can be entirely in the public domain. And again, you have the issues around transparency. If we made part of this exempt, then we went into private session, we started talking about things in private, you almost again set more hairs running in relation to what was the stuff that you talked about. So this is a purposefully, in this respect, bland, anonymised report, so that details in here would potentially identify individuals if there was more details. So it's that fine balance, isn't it, between not putting something in it which makes it have to be exempt in order that the individuals could be identified, and as you say, giving you sufficient information as the committee that you're satisfied with what's going on is proper. So as I say, I will have a little look at those complaints, and I'll initially update the chair, and then perhaps the chair can determine how to take the matter forwards.
Yeah, and I think maybe looking at the documents explanation, this is what you need to fill in here, not what type of thing, to make sure that it is words of one syllable that anyone could understand, or not even there.
Just one other thing, we updated the complaint form possibly 2 years ago to the effect that people needed to supply their evidence when they made their complaint, so that there would have enough information for the council to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I actually know the detail behind a number of these, and Robin will be smiling because he will know that I know that. There will be other areas that will have dealt with some of these complaints, I assume, because I remember one of them was about registering or failure to register interests, a councillor doing that, and that's not shown up there. So I presume that would have been dealt with under a different regime.
That's potentially the case, because obviously those are potentially criminal.
So I think where it's not dealt with because it doesn't fall under, because complaints come to us, and then obviously they're dealt with by different parties. So I think the report should make clear that either some action has taken, because I do believe in that case the member was advised to look at their interests and remedy this situation. And so this looks like nothing's happened, when actually I know that things did, and there's more to it. So I do think that needs to be clearer.
So action was not taken under standards in respect of that. That's why it's not in here.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be clear in here, is that there was a complaint, but it is dealt with outside of the code of practice standards. I mean, it looks like nothing's happened if you read this, but actually there are other things.
So this is great, but if my maths are correct, I make it 13. So we really need like a line or 2 lines which say, in addition to the 13 references above, there were also 62, made that figure up, 62 other complaints, 23 of which were passed over to the police, 24 of which were passed to I don't know who, and then the remainder all passed to, Group C.
Yeah, no, I've understood. Thank you, Chair. I've understood. Yes, in relation to where some context can be provided in relation to bits that don't appear on here that people might expect. Yeah, understood.
Because apart from anything else, and James is next. Apart from anything else, so you've only dealt with 13 complaints this year. Oh, you've had a light load, haven't you? The other 62 that you've been not working on, but had to deal with, aren't mentioned. You see, so we've not got the full picture. Yeah, thanks, James.
I also think that I know, and we don't want to get into detail, but it'd probably be good to know if, for instance, when you see something on the same dates, you can assume that it's probably the same incident. But there's also, so what we can't tell with this is if you've got who's making complaints. So, for instance, you could have one person that's got a vendetta against a councillor or parish councillor, and actually they just keep putting these in there. So I wonder if is just a way to, when it's done next time, of trying to put them into a bit of a category of. It's difficult because you can't say that this is one complaint, it's another, but you sort of would be good to know if you've got a repeating pattern there of something. I don't know how it would be done, but.
So I've heard that, there's a desire where possible for a little more context, and we'll have a think about, what we can give you further to give you, a bit more information, say, whilst remaining anonymous.
And what I think it is just for us to be able to come back on something, so we know that if there's issues that are coming up, we then know that bit more detail with how we can then work on it to deal with those.
Yeah, thank you. Do we ever follow up afterwards? So on one of these, it says that the clerk was asked to liaise with CELT to explore mediation. Is that the end of our involvement, or do we ensure that the clerk has then gone and done that?
So that's an interesting one, because obviously in relation to a parish council, the responsibility is on them in relation to actually then to follow through with what's been spoken to. But it is also almost inevitable that there is an ongoing dialogue between the parish and the council in relation to matters of that nature. So it's not required, but it almost certainly always does happen.
Any more on the complaints? I thought that was very useful. Great, thank you for that, Robin. Proposer and seconder for noting the report. Propose. James, seconded Hannah, thanks. Next one, 6, update on DBS checks. Robin.
That's me.
Oh, sorry, Joe. Yes, go on then.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall at the last meeting back in September, there were 39 out of the current 47 members that provided evidence of a DBS check, and 2 members were at that time and still are unwell. Immediately after the meeting, a member provided evidence of a DBS check. And after contacting those members who had not yet provided evidence, 2 further members provided evidence. And then the group leader of one member advised that a DBS check is carried out as part of their employment, and they will be providing the evidence. And another 2 members have sought support in applying, and I hope to receive that soon. There haven't been any members that have refused to provide a check, so I would say that's been pretty successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That is pretty darn good. When council agreed that we would ask members to have a DBS check in October 24, we did. It was agreed that the monitoring officer and the chief exec would report back to council. So I think we have got one coming up. The one coming up is the last council meeting before the election. We're not having one before the end of the civic year. Am I correct?
So the next meeting is next week, and the agendas would have been published for that. After that, it's annual council, so it would be the meeting in July. Thank you.
I could always raise it under the minutes. I might do that. I just think it's appropriate that as we were asked to sort of come back, we should just report back to council that actually members have done pretty well on this. Monique, Tom.
Quick one. Are we doing DBS checks annually, or is it just on election? So once every term, effectively.
It's normally, and what we agreed was at the beginning of each term, but because we agreed it sort of after we'd started, it was now, and anyone coming
fine.
in after now until the next one.
Fine, that's cool. Thank you.
Tom, Tony. Okay. Yeah, and obviously on our list of things to do, your list of things to do, with the new, whatever new authority comes out, that is going to have to be one of the things, whilst we have made this voluntary, any unitary authority will have children and adult safeguarding responsibilities in as much as safeguarding is everybody's job. It is much more important, and certainly when I was at the county council, it was mandatory. We brought it in and made it mandatory that, and for every election, you will have to sign. All councillors will have to sign up for a DBS check, because you will be involved with very vulnerable children and adults. So. And that's the sort of thing we need on the list of, and this is the sort of thing we've got to put together for the new authority, and that policy, and that policy, and that policy. Because you can't wait until you get there and say, oh, I think we ought to have a DBS check for these people who have just got elected. It's too late then. Tom and James.
Is there a way that we could push under the local governance review to make sure that the law is changed, so that people that are elected to the new unitary authorities, because it's still all undergoing. The government haven't completely made their minds up as to what they're going to do. We don't even know where we're going to be split to yet. So surely there's a way that we could push for that, because I just think it's crazy that you can be an elected councillor, have contact with vulnerable adults, go into schools, for sports days, things like that, but there's absolutely it's just on the presumption that you're not going to do anything wrong. Whereas at least having that DBS check once every 4 years still isn't perfect. But yearly would be better, because you wouldn't know if something had happened in that in between time as the monitoring officer. You wouldn't automatically be made aware if the police weren't aware, or it was committed in another county, another police force. So is that something this committee can push for?
Well, can you hold that thought? Because I was going to raise it, but I'll call you to raise it on the. Item 7, strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. Robin's given us a verbal update. The government did a consultation, and they've got the response, and we were notified, to be fair, through that thing that we get every day, that because I have problems with my eyes, I printed it out. Don't forget, do as I say and not as I do, because MPs more than councillors go into schools, mixed with young children, young people, vulnerable adults. I'm not going to say any more, because I don't want to be libel or slander or something, do we? But there have been cases, admittedly you find out after they die, but there have been cases. I can't recall any cases of apart from alleged, people in much more powerful positions than local elected councillors, i.e. local elected MPs, have got far more scope. And really, it should be mandatory, and it should be coming from the top. Right, this is the standard here, and you all have to follow it. What happens is, this is the standard you lot have to commit to, and then we'll do what we want. But anyway, I'll call you when Robin gets onto that, because I think we should be pushing for that, frankly. Any more on that one, James?
It's just a question of, if we did something like that and we mandated that councillors have to have DBS checks, and I think you would be right to do that, there's no issue with that, but what if something gets flagged up on that DBS check? Surely they could still be a councillor. What does it actually do? Because yes, it's obviously, if something flags up with children, you can make sure that they don't have children, but you can't then stop them from being a councillor still. So I just wonder what happens, because that's what we're trying to get at, of you've got an issue there, you can't do this, but actually there's nothing saying that we can't kick them out as being a councillor.
Yeah, I'll let Robin answer that, but I should have said when we did it at the county council, because the ones that we've all had done, I know people have said, well, here's the number from my job, which could be light, medium or heavy. When we did, they were DBS, they were CRB checks when I had mine at county, and it was the enhanced one because we had children and adults under us. So number one, I'd be pushing for it to be an enhanced one, to be mandatory. Robin.
Yeah, so the point I was going to make is, in fact, so the question asked was, what would happen in the event that there was a finding that came back? So you're 100% right, that does not disqualify a person as a councillor if the penalty, for example, for whatever it was that was done, the threshold of criminality was not met, such as there was a prison sentence of, I think it's more than 6 months, which such would disqualify a person as being a councillor. So it would not stop that person from being a councillor, and we would have no power or authority to do so. But what we could do appropriately is put in place a risk assessment around that person, and allow a small number of appropriate relevant people to know what that risk assessment was, and therefore put controls around it, such as that you would mitigate any concerns that arose out of the potential offending.
Okay, this is a bit of a DBS checks. How do we store the data?
So when we are provided with either evidence, it's either emailed to us or we view it. We've stored it securely, and nobody else has access to the information. And we delete any emails that have come in with that information on.
We don't use single central record, do we?
No.
Company. No. Okay. So and the reason I asked that is I was a school governor, and they used single central record, and they got hacked. And it's been a nightmare, because they stole my passport data, my driving licence data, they had my home address, and because I'm a councillor, it's known in public, a lot of the information. So the information that I'd held privately was hacked, so I would never use them, and I would implore the council never to consider using them, and that anyone who has anything to do with DBS is to make sure their data is not held with them, because the consequences are dire. It's horrendous. So I'm very jumpy now about anyone having any data related to me, quite honestly. So it's a health warning, a very big health warning.
I could say, I don't trust anything online. I don't, to be fair. I don't do online banking. I don't put any personal details up there whatsoever, because of all this, I'm paranoid. However, that place that I paid my pension into all these years wrote to me and said, "Oh, just letting you know, we've been hacked, and all your personal data." And I'm thinking, but I've done everything I possibly can to make sure that I am safe and secure, and I'm not. If they were nearer, I'd have gone round there.
Quite. And the result of this was thousands of teaching staff, governors, and support staff up and down the country for various schools were affected. And all I can say from personal experience is it's a nightmare.
Well, if it's anything to do with me, that's a commitment. That will not be centrally stored. Yes, good. Okay, so can we have a proposer and seconder for noting Joe's report? Tony proposed.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Charles, second. All agreed? Good. Okay. Right, then we get on to number 7, strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. Verbal update, LGIU, daily update, that's what it was on back in November.
Sorry, you entirely caught me out, Chair, because I thought it was the other item first, but you're quite right, it's this item, isn't it? As has been alluded to earlier on this evening, members will no doubt recall that this committee spent a lot of time and effort responding to the government's consultation in relation to strengthening the standards framework. The government has now provided a response to that, and it is set out some headlines as to how they propose to reform the system. I will go through them briefly and hopefully not take up too much of your time. First item, introduction of a mandatory code of conduct, which will include a behavioural code for all local authority types and tiers. A requirement all principal authorities convene formal standards committees to include provisions on the constitution of standards committees to ensure objectivity, accountability and transparency. The requirement that all principal authorities offer individual support during any investigation into code of conduct allegations to both the complainant and the counsellor subject to the allegation. The introduction at the authority level of a right for review for both complainant and the subject elected member to have the case reassessed on grounds that will be set out in legislation. I'm assuming that last sentence, which is a kind of a set of weasel words, is people who respond, I don't like the outcome, won't necessarily have a right to review, but people who can identify a specific, issue that's set out in legislation will do. So it's not going to be a free pass for that's how I read that. But obviously the devil will be in the detail when we see it. Powers for authorities to suspend elected members for a maximum of 6 months for serious code of conduct breaches, with the option to withhold allowances during suspension for the most serious breaches, and introduce premises and facilities bans either in addition or as standalone sanctions. In response to the most serious allegations involving police investigation or where sentencing is pending, the introduction of powers to suspend elected members on an interim basis for an initial period of 3 months, which, if extended, will require regular review. A new disqualification criterion for any elected member subject to the maximum period of suspension more than once within 5 years. And the creation of a new national appeals function to consider appeals from elected members to decisions to suspend them and or withhold allowances, and for complaints if they consider their complaint was mishandled. Any appeal submitted will only be permitted after complainant or elected member has invoked their right of review of the local standards committee decision has been invoked, and that process is completed. So there's a package there which is in effect a series of what you might refer to as measures which tighten the standards regime, but also then the safeguards that were put in place to ensure that actually that doesn't then just become a stick to beat councillors with, so that councillors are also protected. As I'm sure you'll recall, when the Deputy Prime Minister, as she then was, announced all this stuff in the first instance, she was very clear that part of the perceived issue wasn't just bad behaviour by councillors, but it was also the behaviour of the public towards councillors as well, and that it was two sides of the same coin. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, so this is where Tom comes in.
Yes, I think that as a committee we should push to have DBS checks as a standard for all elected members after local governance review. It would, like, as a national thing, not just from a local perspective, but as a national, to really set the standard. Thank you.
So at the end of this, because I'm sure there will be other things, we would like to write to the Minister and say, well done, love, so far so good. Couple of little tweaks. Robin will put it in the correct language, obviously. A couple of little tweaks in light of the basically nationwide local government reorganisation. This would be an opportune moment to bring in mandatory, because everybody be a unitary, so everybody will have the responsibility. Opportune moment to look at bringing in mandatory DBS checks for councillors. Yeah. So we'll put that one on the list so far. Robin will come back on all these at the end. Then I had Hannah.
Thank you. So local government has kind of gone down this route previously where it's had kind of national appeal boards, and I know that's how things work in Wales and in Scotland as well. Where what I have some concerns around, and it might be that it's covered in the paperwork, which I haven't read the review. What I worry about is the potential for politics to get in the way of something like a suspension. Appreciate that it lays out that suspensions would be under significant breaches of code of conduct, and so there would be officer involvement in, and probably independent person in determining what was a serious breach of the code of conduct. But I have some concerns about the independence of decision for that whole process, and how that would work in terms of if a standards committee is called on to look into what is deemed a very serious breach of the code of conduct. They would have to be, like, suspending someone and making a decision about their finances is a massive decision, and it's a huge responsibility for those individuals to make. So I would hope that alongside that there's quite a suite of training beyond what we have at the moment as councillors, because it's a significant step up, isn't it, in terms of responsibility?
Yeah, so for me, obviously, I'm totally on board with the DBS, but I do think that we need to put it down that it will only ever be basic DBS, because the problem is that obviously if we start saying, well, it's got to be a standard or even an enhanced, you're going to be pushing people to end up disclosing spent convictions, which isn't legal, like in certain cases. So I just feel like, are we overstepping our power a little bit here, trying to make legislation that isn't actually UK law?
I'm sure there's people who've done it more recently than me. This came up when we did it at county, and it was voluntary for that final year, and then the new election year you came in, and it was in all the paperwork that KCC gave to prospective councillors, candidates, that you will be expected to. So that final year when we brought it in, it was voluntary, and I know somebody who decided that they wouldn't voluntarily do it, and we had quite a few questions on this, and I think that it needs to be demystified, because it came up somewhere else recently where I was. If it's a spent conviction, it doesn't always appear. If let's say you was caught done for shoplifting 32 years ago, it's totally irrelevant if you've been completely clean since. And these things do say spent. There are very few. In our case, there's the Senior Democratic Services and Electoral Services Manager, who gets the numbers, or a copy of, not that people should have copied the form, but and that's it. Obviously, if there were any issues, then that the role of that post would be to talk to, say, the monitoring officer and say, look, what do I do with this? But it's not like, let's post it on the news. So I don't doubt that when, and the majority of the, however many of us were there at the time, is it 84, had it, I cannot honestly recall, oh yeah, you know, he's had his DBS checked. Did you know about this? Not a peep. So what I'm saying is that whatever may or may not have happened in the past, which is totally irrelevant to now, it's not spread about, and it's not always with this new system in. I'm trying to be, because I don't say it came up when I was at a meeting last week, and for volunteers you would need to have a DBS check, and one of the people who was there said basically, what was it? It was sort of a public meeting. Well, half the people on the island would have something to show up if they had a DBS check.
That's unfair.
This was island people there, please. You know, we don't mind joshing ourselves. Or would you say it was 3/4 then? But, you know, and it might put off people volunteering for, because this, you know, certain volunteer jobs you have to have a DBS check. And I think in this case it would be enhanced. And the person was saying it might put people off volunteering if they knew that. And it was, can't we sort of do a child's guide type? This is what happens here, and that's what happened there, so that people don't get put off. Oh, so, you know, when I was done for shoplifting, what did I say, 32 years ago? 32 years ago, when I lived in Margate or wherever, and it was what everybody did. I never lived in Margate, by the way. It ain't going to show up. Oh yeah, well, I'm quite happy to volunteer. Where do I sign to do this checky thing? You see. But you know, this particular person was saying that a lot of people are put off because of the, you know, the mystique around DBS checks. And also, I mean, I know people who've had them and waited months and months and months for an answer. And when I had mine done for the hospital, it was less than a week. In fact, I rang them up and I said, no, I spoke to Charlotte, and she said, well, it depends how many places you've lived and where where were you born? Well, where I was born and where I live, you were looking at 2 addresses less than a mile apart. So it was like less than a week before I got it back. Clear, by the way, just to let you know. Apart from the shoplifting 32 years ago in Margate, yeah.
But she does live on the island.
Yeah, yes, I'm one of the 3/4. No, we mustn't be mean. But no, this came up from an islander. What I'm saying is that there is a lot of mystique around DBS checks, and actually there shouldn't be, and it should not put anybody off. That's something that they did in their youth. I appreciate, or even before their youth. Are we like the States where it's sealed? Do you want to? Yeah, you probably know a lot more about it than I do. Obviously,
just so pick up on the sort of couple of DBS things that come up. So, Councillor Lundy's obviously suggested lobbying government at this time, which would seem to be appropriate in relation to, you know, we still have the response, but we don't yet at this point have a bill or anything like that. So it's, you know, there's still, you know, the opportunity to do so. I got the sense that the chair was leaning towards a letter from the committee, presumably signed by the chair, which you have the opportunity to take a vote on a bit later on in relation to that. And I will assist the chair in the drafting of that letter to put forward how we think it should be approached. Councillor Miller is 100% right that as the law stands at the minute, you couldn't possibly ask for a council to have an enhanced DBS. I guess the advantage of the folks that we're writing to make the law, and if they wanted to make the law such as that councils have to have an enhanced DBS, then that would become the law and it wouldn't be illegal. It would be exactly what you had to do. As you say, obviously there are professions, you'll be aware, whereby spent convictions, you know, they are exempt professions whereby convictions are never spent and they have to disclose it. And one of those, for example, is a matter which Swale Borough Council licenses, which is taxi drivers. Taxi drivers' convictions are never spent for the purposes of that legislation. And so you could, for example, add councillors to that list that your convictions are never spent, and then, you know, ultimately you would then be justifiably potentially have an enhanced DBS if that's what the law said so. So ultimately, I would have thought that in relation to lobbying, at the end of the day, we can say as a committee we think it would be ideal, even though we understand you'd need to change the law for all councillors to receive an enhanced DBS check and to do so on an annual basis, in order to ensure the safety of the public, particularly moving into a unitary authority. And the government may or may not take that forward, but they might take it forward in relation to, we think an enhanced check is too intrusive in relation to councillors and the risk that poses in relation to how the rest of that system works and is set up. But we do support a basic check every 12 months, or in the alternative, a basic check, on election and every 4 years thereafter. Ultimately, until the question is posed and is asked, we don't know what the answer might be. But I'd suggest that those are the things that are within the gift of the committee to request.
No, I mean it's pretty much covered. Like I said, for me, it's just whilst I'm in favour, I think that if they're basic checks, it's a little bit more, I think, understanding. It just seems crazy. You can't be a taxi driver in Swale, but you can be a registered offender as the President of America. Sorry, that was out loud, but yeah.
That isn't true. That you could be a taxi driver with a criminal conviction. It would just may have to go to a licensing subcommittee in order for you to do so.
What, for being a sex offender?
As I said, it may just have to go to. I'm not saying that it would be approved, but any type of offending, there is the potential for that to happen.
Nothing further, thank you.
He may have dementia, but he's making a fortune out of it, isn't he? I mean, he's made billions since he's been there. Yeah, but till he forgets. Okay, so I don't think that we'd be looking at an annual check. I think it would be the term. And let's be fair, I think that in our communities, well, I know in our communities, if any of us did anything between the DBS check on the 1st of May, year one, they damn well make sure it was spread about by the end of year 4, so we didn't get elected, regardless of whether there was DBS check. What I'm saying is that there isn't a need to have an annual check because you would know.
I think actually, in fact, that I think it was Councillor Nundy's point is that if an offence is committed during the term of being a councillor, and immediately the day after, it's a bit like your car when it passes its MOT, it might be unfit for use on the road the very day after, mightn't it? And there's a similar thing. You've got a clean DBS check on the 1st of May, but if you then commit a serious offence on the 2nd of May, it might then not come to light until you were re-elected 4 years later.
Unless you lived on the Isle of Chappie, in which case it would be around in several hours, wouldn't it? And then it would be a matter for the Standards Committee to decide whether or not, under the new regime, we should suspend you. Not we, because I won't be here. Hannah?
Thanks. There's also quite a lot of legislation at the moment around, like, if you were to get charged with something by the police, like, that's covered under the Local Government Act of 1972. So it says at what point you would potentially be suspended as a councillor, you'd be hoofed out as a councillor, and actually that bar is reasonably high, and so there's even if we did have yearly checks and something comes up on it, at this very moment there's nothing that would be there's nothing we could do about it, apart from Robin rightly said we could look at something like a a risk assessment, but there's, I mean, the standards process at the moment doesn't really have a lot of teeth, and that's the point of changing it, right?
I'd take issue there. It doesn't have a lot of teeth. It doesn't have any teeth. Right. It doesn't have any teeth. But I'm trying to make it so vague that we all know I'm talking about, but nobody online does. Where allegations are made and things wend their merry way through the legal system, at the moment, day one, I've got my completely clean DBS check. Day two, the enhanced is different. We'll come to that. But day two, something happens, and we could suspend. But at the moment, it's bad luck. Never mind. Something happens. But it ain't going to come to court for 18 months. And there's diddly squat we can do. You remain as a councillor. You remain, and basically you sign on for you get elected for 4 years. You can knock yourself out, as so many councillors do, or you can do diddly squat. You get the same basic allowance that's coming out of the taxpayers' money. And there, at the moment, there is absolutely nothing we can do about it. And we know we get a public outcry on the odd occasion that these things may have happened. Is this vague enough? So we know the sort of area where we might use it in the future if there was another case. In the case of enhanced DBS checks, it isn't just, this is what they told us at the time, it isn't just, we've gone a bit deeper, and there was that sealed record when you was a teenager and you were caught, doing, I don't know, whatever. My imagination's gone tonight. It's that much enhanced, but also, well, they weren't charged with X, and think that man who used to have the big medallion, Jim Fixit. There were whispers for many, many years. To be fair, there were reports to the police, but that's another matter. But, everybody knew there was something. And enhanced checks, we were told at the time, was not just things you were charged with, but sort of things that were information that came forward that at least would give you something to look into. Yeah, Robin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so an enhanced check is not just what's actually on the record that resulted in a conviction, warning or reprimand. It is also information held on fundamentally the police database, whereby they have intelligence which an officer considers is relevant to the appointment that you are considering making. And so it may be stuff whereby there were complaints but no formal action actually followed. And in fact, you just reminded me, you made a point in relation to our youth records sealed. I've never actually done youth justice, but my recollection is that a youth criminal conviction, whilst not wiped, is not disclosable after they become an adult. It's my recollection.
Too many of them, not that I watch much telly, but what I do watch is American, and the kids, they are sealed, and unless you've got the technology to get through it, you're not allowed to look. I wasn't sure in this country. Okay, so I think we're all on the same track here.
I never responded to Councillor Perkins' point. I picked up the DBS point.
Yeah.
So yeah, Councillor Perkin, as you say, there's this whole new suite of potentially good ideas. As I said earlier on, the devil's going to be in the detail. What's the legislation ultimately going to look like? Is it just going to be, here's your new code, sort yourselves out? Is it actually going to be a code and arrangements? There's a bit of it that sounds to me a little bit like, well, it'd have to be a code and arrangements. What's going to be then, the resource that comes into it? So if they're talking about support for the complainant and the subject member, where is that coming from? There's currently no, budget or resource for that sort of thing. Is that going to be a new burden? There's currently, nice idea how you're actually going to make that work. And as I say, at the moment, we don't even have a draft bill, to look at or anything like that. So at the moment, we need to, I respectfully suggest, continue to plough our own furrow, do what we need to do in relation to the arrangements that we have, and see ultimately what comes forwards following this. But I think you're absolutely right in relation to, because the consequences are becoming potentially harsher for what's deemed to be more serious matters. Well, how are they going to define what's a more serious matter? The list goes on and on and on, doesn't it? Ultimately, we'll need to see how it is played out through the legislation and what follows. And you say, and also then, even if it's left to ourselves, what is then going to be appropriate training and support for members who are going to sit as members on a standard subcommittee? Because ultimately, where you have the power to suspend or to remove allowances or both, that is going to most likely lead to robust challenges to those decisions. So yeah, completely understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, I can't really answer the question a minute other than that we're all waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen next.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's difficult because we're not going to know when the legislation has gone forward and if it will at any point during the term. But if it does, I think we'll need to be quite quick in responding to it, just because training will need to be done and there'll need to be kind of calendar clears. Yesterday we were looking at the member development working group about the lack of space for additional training in the calendar, given how busy it gets. So I know it's not an hour problem. We can't fix it now, and we don't know when that will happen. But it does seem like it would be quite a significant undertaking, and so we probably need to assess that further down the road.
So can we agree then that Robin will draft a letter for me to sign on your behalf, that we write to the minister saying this is an opportune moment, with all the new councils that are going to be staggeredly brought in over the next few years, unitary authorities, that we really believe that this should be mandatory, and the other issues around it, like the training, which needs to go. There's no point waiting like it put in the bill, basically. Because then they won't have to change too much afterwards. So that we would like this put in the bill. Otherwise, you're going to have standards committees brought in, new authorities, new people, no experience, no training. Could be great fun for people for a year or two, couldn't it? Getting away with almost murder. Yeah. I will be available as an independent person, by the way, with the taser.
Actually, I don't think you will, because I think you're exempt. I think you're exempt for 5 years off the top of my head.
That would get this right. Finally, then we've got recruitment of independent persons, verbal update.
Yes, Chair. So members will recall that on the previous occasion when we extended the council's 2 independent persons through until September 2026, that there was an interest from the committee in whether or not the, if I can put it this way, offering and the strength and breadth of the independent persons offering could be improved, but without necessarily going through the process of a potentially long, expensive and sometimes futile recruitment exercise. To that end, I have in fact approached the monitoring officer at Maidstone Borough Council, a gentleman named Alan Harrison, who is a person who has well over 12 years experience as head of legal, multiple years experience as a deputy monitoring officer, and is also actually currently the independent person for 2 other local authorities. If he would be interested in also becoming an independent person for Swale Borough Council, he is interested in being an independent person for Swale Borough Council. And that obviously we now have a period between now and September of 6 months whereby we have 2, but they are going to expire, and we have an interested person who potentially could be appointed by council if this committee recommended that person to council. And so really just to put the ball back in your court, if you think it would be a good idea to take any further steps with Mr. Harrison, or whether or not you would like to consider any other approach to dealing with this issue.
Before I call Tom, I do not need to declare an interest because, to my knowledge, no relation. Harrison.
Not to my knowledge either. No, I don't think it's just a coincidence.
What council did you say that he was it head of legal services for?
So was head of legal services for a period of just under 12 years at Elmbridge Borough Council, was a deputy monitoring officer at East Hampshire District Council, and was then the independent person for Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council for a period of 4 years, is one of the, in fact, the current independent person for Maidstone Borough Council, appointed for... as actually says, he was appointed for 4 years, but he's just been reappointed from memory. And he is also currently the independent person for Winchester City Council. So he's currently the independent person for 2 councils, and he has capacity to also be an independent person for this council.
Okay, I thought you said that he worked for Maidstone. I thought that might have been a conflict of interest because we share services with them, but I'll stand down. Thank you.
I think it would be good to have someone a bit more experience, but if that's all we've got.
The independent person.
Not necessarily a matter for this committee, but similar to Swale, Maidstone Borough Council appointed 2 independent persons, but one of them has resigned, so they have one independent person at the present time, whereas obviously Swale currently has 2 independent persons. There is not actually any limit to the number of independent persons you can have if you feel that there's a need to have more than 1, 2 or even 3.
The brain does sometimes go, but I have a vague recollection that we did at one point have 3. Don't forget, I've been here a while.
You've not mentioned that.
Sorry, I don't mean independent persons sitting here. We had independent persons for... Is that different?
You may have also independent persons for audit committee and that so there are different categories and classes of independent person. This is the independent person for standards, obviously, whereby I say at the present time we have 2 independent persons for standards, may don't have 1 independent person for standards, but there's not strictly a limit, although I'm sure there must be a diminishing return in having 10, for example.
Just come back, I've got no issue. I think it seems to be a good route to go down. If we've got someone that's interested with that experience, it's good. But I think we did put something out on social media and did something as well about asking, did we get any other response at all from publicly asking?
So I think what you're referring to is the council was seeking people for the independent remuneration panel, which is yet another different independent person. There was a train of thought whereby if this committee didn't necessarily feel that this person was a suitable fit for this committee, then obviously we could have also thought about those people for this role instead. But the sense I'm getting is that this committee thinks that this person might be a good appointment. So.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with the appointment. I wondered whether if we have, we've got two independent people, whether we should consider gender balance in those two appointments, and whether we are at the moment in a space where our standards committee would be two men as independent persons.
So at the present time, the current independent persons, who is one gentleman and one lady, are continuing to be our independent person through until September 2026. Obviously, this committee will necessarily meet at some point before September 2026 and decide whether to choose to reappoint those people or to not reappoint those people, or one or other of those people. That's a matter for the committee to consider at the appropriate time. I think actually, perhaps if I be so bold, the pertinent situation at the minute is, what steps do we take if you're interested in appointing this person as an independent person? And obviously, if it was done at the same committee meeting, then they might have the same term. It may be that you think at this particular point in time, a 2-year term might be a sensible term come September 2026. But you might also want to cover your bases, have a 3-year term, because who knows what may or may not happen. There's sort of like, kind of, those things are all perhaps, matters for a future report either to this committee or council. I think really my question to this committee is, how would you like to take this matter forward? Do you want a further report here with the gentleman's CV and that kind of thing in order to make a recommendation to council, or are you happy to have a report go straight to council that recommends that appointment to go to a future council meeting?
I think if it doesn't come to this committee, it still goes to council meeting. Yeah, so I think as long as there's somewhere along the lines that we're sort of getting the information to be able to make that decision, I don't necessarily think it necessarily needs to come here. But as long as, especially if it's full council, every member gets to look to make that decision. So.
Yeah, the social media stuff, because I had an interview with the IRP, and they were basically residents, 2 residents plus the SEE, whatever they are down there, person. So they just applied. So you would put a report to council recommending 2 out of 3 or 2 of 3?
So certainly in relation to ensuring that we are in time, we would need to make sure that it goes to a council, or because in relation to appointing this gentleman, which I say is decision for council, not saying it would go next week, but if it went next week, you then appoint that person for a term, and you would potentially logically appoint that person for the period of time that we are likely to exist. There would seem to be little value in continuing to keep having recruitment exercises for the, finite time that the council is likely to be left for. So you might like to give yourself a bit of wiggle room to be on the safe side, and then you potentially have a later meeting whereby you determine what to do with the other 2, or you bring them all forwards together. And I say there's a bit of it whereby it's a matter for you folks, this committee. What would you like me to do in relation to bringing these folks forwards?
What do we think? My view is let's deal with it once at council, whenever that council meeting is. Let's deal with it once. But number one, we've got 2 existing people who we have had the details from before, albeit we will get some blue paper stuff. It's usually on blue paper because it's personal. And one person that we don't know anything about, who we haven't had the written details on. It's how I think it's probably easier if we recommend 2 people to council rather than council at that time of night suddenly decides, okay, let's discuss. Well, no, I propose A and B. I propose A and C. I propose B and C. Can you imagine? You'd be there into the morning. Yeah. So what do you think? I like the idea of this person because going forward, we could well need some ultra experience. So I'll propose that, we've got a report anyway, I'll propose that we put forward this person to council to be approved as an independent person to start September until such time as we no longer need him. How's that?
I think you probably need to put a finite time on it. But if, for example, you said 3 years, I think you'd probably be overwhelmingly likely that the appointment would cease by nature of the authority ceasing to exist within that period of time.
I'll propose that then. Do I have a seconder? James, thanks. So that way, that would be done and dusted. And then would you propose that we put forward one of the two, or just council has two to decide on?
I think that if the committee is going to make a recommendation to council for one of the two existing independent persons, then I think there probably does need to be a report back to this committee whereby it sets out the merits of that person. And arguably, if you're putting the two to this committee, well, then it would seem to make sense that you put all three to the committee and you ask the committee to make recommendations from the pool of all three. And again, I think that at this point we shouldn't make any judgment in relation to that, because the committee, having considered all the papers, and of course it might be the case that when this issue comes up, one or more of the current independent persons might say, I'm not interested in applying for my own job, thanks very much, I'm no longer going to partake in it. So I think potentially, given the mood in the room in relation to like reducing by, so we continue to have two and not having three, I think it would make sense if we do have a report to this committee, to the next meeting of this committee, which can then make a recommendation to council, just confirming that with Joe that the timing for that works, because we obviously need to have a recommendation for this committee go to council prior to September 2026. Otherwise, we find ourselves potentially at risk of being in the position whereby we have no independent person and therefore breaking the law. So obviously, we're going to avoid that. So I think at this point, if you're looking at reducing from a pool of three down to two, you should consider all of them at this committee. That would be my advice.
So we won't send this person's name forward to council. So when's the next meeting, James?
I don't know when the next meeting is. But the other thing we could do is just say that we'll have three. Because if we've got three people that are happy to be independent persons, I don't see any issue with having three. We can then choose at the time who we go to and who we need, because it's better to have too many than not enough.
That would be a good idea. Does the Constitution say that we have two people, two independent persons as part of the Standards Committee? No, doesn't say anything. So we could have, actually, to be fair, they don't always come. Sometimes it's how often since the Standards Committee's been here have we had two? I'm looking around the room to see who's been here the longest. Have we had two independent persons on a regular basis? So if you had a choice of three, two may well come along. Hannah?
Just in terms of officer capacity, obviously all three would have to be briefed on any, or would we pick who was going to be on the panels? I'm just thinking, if you have an extra person that you have to brief about all the changes to a potential case, is that a pain?
So I think we have found in the past that having more than one provides you with useful resilience. And just with a mind to, for example, the notion that in the future complainants and subject members will have support. I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't mean everyone's going to end up with more independent persons. And again, it might actually be that having additional independent persons at this point in time means that we're ahead of the drag curve and we've got some people, as opposed to when this all comes out and people are then scratching around trying to find extra independent persons when we know it's not easy to find them necessarily in the first place. So whilst it's ultimately a matter for this committee to make a recommendation and for council to make a determination, personally, I would not be against retaining all of our existing independent persons, and using them on matters, to which they are best suited.
And if we did that, in that case, it skips out, bringing it back here, and we can just take all three straight to full council. We've already got a proposal and second on the floor, but you can alter the proposal that you did, and I'll be happy to second it.
So the proposal is basically we're going to put all three names to full council to say, can you approve these three people for the independent persons for a 3-year period, or a 3.5-year period in some cases, depending when it goes.
I think probably potentially at this point we might deal with them all in time for them, because obviously we can appoint them ahead of time in order that they are appointed before September 26th, so that we have no break in service. But we can, I think timing is a matter that we can deal with outside of this committee.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is because sorry, Joe.
Can I just ask a question? If the two existing independent people, if one or both do not want to continue, where does that leave us?
Well, I was going to say, which is quite handy, would we be able to communicate with both of them to say, further to, extending, the committee will be asking for you to be approved. Have you changed your mind, basically?
Yeah, so obviously the current independent persons are well aware that this item is on the agenda for discussion this evening. So obviously we would be feeding back to them what's happened. Currently, we haven't voted yet, but I understand from what's being said in the room that we would simply be putting forward to them, we would like you to put yourselves forward to stand again, and this committee will recommend you to continue to be our independent persons until this council ceases to be, or a relevant date in the future. Are you still happy to do so? And that, by way of information, we're going to add a third one, to provide extra resource resilience and experience in this post, due to the nature of the changing situation with local government standards over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, as anticipated. And obviously, then I would further suggest that if ultimately one of them says, I no longer want to continue, that we just continue with two. And obviously, at this particular point in time, we know that we've got one person who is interested. So ultimately, if both went, we're not interested in continuing, we'd still have one, and we'd still meet our legal obligation to have one. And again, potentially come back to committee at a future date and decide again what we meant in two in the circumstances if we've only got one, and we would think we would be better off with more than one. But cross that bridge when we come to it.
Are we all happy with that proposal? Yes. Right, that's unanimous. Thank you, team. Right, synchronise the watch. -1. Thank you all for your attendance. I declare the meeting closed at 8:17. Good, yeah. I took off the one.